So for the last 10 years, my main game has been Destiny 2, and I never thought it would be any different in 2024. But over the last year, I've swapped my Guardian for a Warrior of Light in Final Fantasy XIV, so welcome to my first Sprout talk for A Realm Reborn. So a small confession right off the bat, as of this recording, I'm basically at the post-Shadowbringers patches, so 5 point something, I'm not 100% sure exactly which one. But somehow being nearly an Endwalker and 770 hours deep, I'm still a Sprout. But I wanted to make this video for a little bit because this is my first proper MMO and I was honestly so surprised by the whole experience. So let's get into why I went to Final Fantasy XIV. So let's start with a little bit of context. I've been a fan of Final Fantasy for the longest time. Like a lot of people, right? I haven't played them all, but I'm sure I've played the majority of them. And after playing 16, I just wanted more, and I hadn't had that in a while from this franchise. But I think the swell from Remake and the hype for Rebirth and 16 just coming out really all hit me at once. So after finishing 16, I didn't want to wait for Rebirth at that time. So I went looking for games in the series which I'd missed. And lo and behold, 14 is half price for the entire thing on PSN. So that was an instant buy. Yes, I know about the free trial. Now, I didn't at the time, I fell for that trap. But for anyone that isn't aware, there is a free trial of the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with expanded. So anyway, I started this game the same way I do any game where you can make your own character. White hair, orange eyes, woman character, because let's face it, armor designs just look better for them than they do for us. The job choice, however, was easy for me. I've logged Dragoons since Final Fantasy 2, but then I learned exactly what that meant for Final Fantasy 14. But with that all out of the way, my journey through Eorzea began in New Gridania with the Lancers Guild. And straight away, I was surprised at how normal a Final Fantasy everything felt, but I was essentially hooked from the get-go. I really thought the game done such a good job at immersing the player and being this fledgling adventurer going around and helping people, learning about the guilds and the grand companies and the all-round politics of the cities and the world. Overall though, I think I was lucky as I'd done a bit of research on the game and found out that you kind of really only want to follow the MSQ icons, and without knowing that, I'm not sure if I would have had such an easy time getting into this as like a Destiny. But in a completely different way, with 14, it's overwhelming seeing 1,000 different icons and NPCs all at once, a bit like WoW. I have no idea what I'd expected to do if I didn't know about this one icon in particular. But we got through, and I don't think I've ever been happier playing a game as I have this one, and that's my genuine overall feelings on the experience as a whole. And a lot of that has to do with the story. This part was probably my biggest surprise out of all of them, so stop me if it starts to sound a bit familiar. But it wasn't an immediate surprise because obviously you have to go through a tutorial on the introduction to Eorzea, the Calamity, the New Gridania, or whichever starting city you ended up at. Meeting your first of the Scions, in my case it was Yida and Papalymo, and being introduced to the idea of Ascians as the core antagonist. But where the story really starts to pick up is with the introduction of the Primals, or the Icons, or the Espers, or the Aeons, or the Summons, or the Eidolons, whichever one the game decides, it keeps jumping around. But the Primals and where they first start coming into it with Ifrit, Titan, Ramuh and Garuda, this really took me back. As I said earlier, I've just come off the back of Final Fantasy XVI, which is also made by CBU3, produced by Yoshi P, using icons as a core narrative device. I'd be lying if I said I didn't find that a little funny, and while I think 16 has the better narrative compared to just A Realm Reborn and nothing else, I wasn't about to judge 14 for what 16 had done. But for what A Realm Reborn is, it done enough to keep me interested. It's got so many twists and turns, all while staying relatively simple with a basic good struggles against bad and never trying to be anything more style of story, which with the context of how 2.0 came to be, I think it needed to be simple, right? It needed to just get people back on board and after the state of the original game launched in. And I think even though I wasn't one of those people back then who the game was targeted for originally, it still gets the same job done with bringing in new people, and I think it's a positive because trying to learn how all these different MMO systems work alongside a heavy Final Fantasy style story would have been way too much. So I'm glad that for a Sprout's first baby steps, they kept it simple and concise. But one thing A Realm Reborn fails with is the characters. You can count on one hand and have 5 fingers spare at how many actually good characters there are at the start. Everyone is hollow and two-dimensional, and you kind of just have to go off nothing but vibes. But that doesn't hang around, like the game does eventually remember to start giving characters actual personalities, but not all of them unfortunately. There is one that gets left behind in that department.
My name is Minthelia.
But that kind of starts once they finish building up the political structure of Eorzea, which unfortunately is 80% in the game. But I'm not one to get mad about politics in the game, especially a fantasy franchise. Like, let's be real now. That's basically half of these games, if not more. Anyway, while in the long run, I can look back and really appreciate that they did that and the game is all the more stronger for it, I wish that the 20% the game gives to these characters was a bit more. But what I really did appreciate was how each job has its own specific side quest with a focus, at least for Dragoons, on the lore and the history of it. So that helped a lot with connecting with the world even more, and maybe one day I'll get the courage to actually properly start a tank and a healer to spread my wings a bit more. But for the time being, I'm going to stick with just the one DPS role and maybe the bard so I can learn a few covers on the controller. If I had to pick a fault with the job quests though, it would probably be having them as side quests, because again, if I hadn't looked up a fair amount of this game beforehand, I would have probably ran into like an endgame dungeon or raid and got kicked for griefing because I didn't have a job stone. Like sure, make them side quests, but tie them into the story a bit more so it's more easily accessible. And I know like the MSQ button up top, it also has the important side quests there as well, but that's so easily missed. Thankfully though, my experience with endgame content in 14, I think I've only come across people without a job stone like maybe twice. But speaking of, the endgame content in Final Fantasy XIV is an interesting one, especially in the earlier expansions, because as a solo player, my experience was the duty finder was empty of any and all hard and extreme content. And after finding out about that the hard way, waiting for hours and coils without knowing anything about it, I just had to give up and run everything desynced, and that's not a community failure in the slightest, that's on Square Enix for not doing more to help keep that old content alive. The dungeons are okay because I found after the first initial run, having those unlocked in the duty finder gets people in there a lot more. Maybe that's just my experience though. But that's not to say I want them to do what they've done with the Crystal Tower raids, though having that mandatory for what will be very obvious reasons later on is a godsend. But I'm going to talk about my experience with the raids in the next Sprout talk because I want to keep this to just 2.0 content. But I will touch on the binding coils of Bahamut since the first turn is 2.0 content. But when everything was all said and done, I found out I could just desync everything and that the coils raids have like actually really important story beats in there because as pretty much everyone knows, but for those that don't, the actual ending of A Realm Reborn is told here and it reintroduces a character you haven't seen this entire time apart from the beginning, and it's actually like really good and emotional and brings extra layers to the themes of identity and legacy in the past not defining who you are in A Realm Reborn. But the coils, they're more than just a story beat, and I like to raid as blind as I can, so I ran coils desynced, and my biggest takeaway was nothing but pure regret. Because the level design, the encounters, the music, the tiny taste I got from the crumbs of the mechanics for doing it desynced is something if I could go back 10 years and get younger me to play 14 instead of anything else, I would have gone insane playing this the way that it's intended, and that's just the first 5 turns. But to round out this part of the Sprout talk, I want to just say how surprised, shock I know that's the theme of this video, I was at just how enjoyable the start of the Relic quest were, which I know I'm doing it 10 years removed from the original versions, poster patches and the nerfs and buffs to drop rates. So I'm sure back then it was more challenging and it took a lot more time to do it. But both the Chimera and the Hydra fights were great fun. Naturally, I desynced the extremes, but I would have had so much fun doing those legitimately. But it's definitely all worth it at the end of the day because these are some of the best clams for Dragoons you'll get in the game. So overall, A Realm Reborn done its job. I know a lot of the community likes to hate on ARR, and I get it. It's so far removed from the point the game is currently at, and it does show its age a little bit. But it's got such a high level of charm and familiarity that if you're one of the poor unfortunate souls like me, you'll be instantly hooked on it. The gameplay loop, at least in my limited experience as a Dragoon, was fun, and the world of dungeons, the raids and trials are all so well designed apart from one. And there's just genuinely so much to literally get yourself lost in once you're comfortable within the game. I'm genuinely so glad that after 10 years of this game's life, I finally decided now is the time to jump in. And I get the sense that like a lot of things, Final Fantasy XIV is one of those games or movies or shows or whatever you want, that it just has a habit of finding you at the right time. As Destiny has really lost its way, I'll always love that game and probably still play it from time to time, but at the minute, not right now. Not until something drastic changes with Bungie in that game's direction. But to have Final Fantasy, a game I've adored since I was a kid, and have this experience just here waiting for me to dive into when I need it the most, is something I'll always genuinely be thankful for. But that's going to be it for today's Sprout Talk. I'll absolutely be doing more of these. It's going to be a whole thing on the channel, so hopefully you enjoyed this video and are looking forward to the rest of the series. Next up, I'm going to be covering the 2.1 to 2.5 patch contents, so if you're interested in what I've got to say on that, maybe leave a like for the algorithm gods as well as a comment. I want to know if you're just starting out or if you've been playing for a while. Either way, what do you think of 2.0 A Realm Reborn, whatever you want to call it? If you can't think of a comment, just leave a free trial, because of course. Let me know that you made it this far and stay tuned to the channel. Subscribe, hit the bell. I've been Mitch692, you've been great, and this was my first Sprout Talk. So, peace.